Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is Nick Mayo, and I am a senior risk consultant with HAI Group. I work closely with housing authorities across the country and within my territory to provide risk control services for our members. I've assisted multiple organizations with planning and the emergency response aspect of a post-fire response. So I'm happy to be here today to present on this critical topic, which is how property managers can effectively respond after a fire and the post-fire response for property managers. This webinar isn't just about damage control, it's about preserving the safety of your residents, maintaining your property's integrity, and navigating a process that can be overwhelming at times, but with the information that's going to be presented today, hopefully we can provide you with some tools to enhance this post-fire response for you all as property managers in a housing organization. So to provide a little background about myself, my name is Nick Mayo. I am a senior risk consultant with HAI Group here in Cheshire, Connecticut. My territory includes Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Vermont, and a few other New England states. I've been with the company for almost 15 years. When I am not in the office, I am a full-time career firefighter with the City of Middletown Fire Department. I do have the opportunity to look at this post-fire response training, both with the perspective of a risk control consultant along with a shift commander as a battalion chief. And I am able to give a little bit of feedback and insight on not only the insurance world, but also the emergency response world. So as questions come up, or if there are questions in regards to either sides of that coin, by all means, please ask, and I can give you any resource and information that I have available to me. So to discuss our agenda for today, we're going to start off discussing fire data. I think that's a great place to start. A little bit of data on what we're talking about, why we're here, why we're discussing this topic. We will talk about immediate safety measures post-fire and best recommendations on what to do as a property manager. Communication protocols, how best to communicate with not only your staff and emergency services on scene, but also your residents. When it comes to the insurance and claim reporting process, we will discuss a few slides on how to start that process, and then transitioning from there, the restoration and repair side in the aftermath of a fire. That part of the discussion I think is always good for the planning aspect in your emergency response plans for the aftermath of a fire. To round out the webinar, we will be discussing some legal considerations along with information on how to support your residents post-fire, because this is a catastrophic event. This is a high-risk, low-frequency event for you all as property managers. So having a plan and being a part of this discussion, I think, is a great sounding board and a foundation for your emergency response plans. So this is the agenda on what we are going to discuss. Let's get into a few of our session objectives. By the end of this session, my hope is that you walk away with a clear understanding of what to do immediately after a fire. Secondly, how to communicate effectively with residents and stakeholders. What the insurance and restoration process should look like is an important objective of this session. How to plan for recovery and how to do that safely, and also how to better prepare for the future. So discussing the next steps for future improvement of fire response plans is a key objective. So if we look at these 5 objectives on the screen, hopefully information and the data included in the webinar will meet these objectives, but these are the 5 key session objectives for this webinar. To get started, we're going to talk a little bit about the data. So the numbers tell the story. Structure fires accounted for $42 million in property losses in the United States, according to NFPA data from 2021 to 2023. In 2023, there were 352,000 residential structure fires, in the United States. The leading cause for these fires was cooking. This seems to be a leading cause industry-wide every year. We see this at HAI Group as a high frequency of our claims, preparing for responding to And having a plan for kitchen fires is important, not only as a property manager, but also for us in the fire service. Our goal is to get there as quickly, safely, and effectively as possible to arrive on scene, stretch a hose line, and put that kitchen fire out as quickly as possible. And then on the flip side, for the property management aspect, it's educating residents what to do in case of a fire, who to alert, how to get out effectively and safely, and notify the fire department to respond. Again, we're looking at almost 300, a little over 350,000 residential structure fires, and the leading cause of that was cooking. 3 out of 5 fire-related deaths happen in homes lacking operational smoke detectors. I can't stress this enough. From a risk management standpoint, along with a fire service life safety aspect, operational smoke detectors save lives. That's a grassroots foundational campaign across the country, whether it's through NFPA, whether it's through your local fire department, making sure that the fire protection equipment on site, in the units, in the building, everything should be maintained according to the manufacturer in tandem with NFPA recommendations. If we're looking at the statistic of 3 out of 5 fire-related deaths happen in homes lacking operational smoke detectors, that's something that we can control. That's something that we can address. Step one is making sure that you have the appropriate number of smoke detectors in your units, and step two is making sure that they are all operational and that at all times they're being inspected and checked on a regular basis. So throughout this presentation, there's 4 questions that I like to just pose, and it gives a perspective from me personally on where the presentation not only is going to go, but also what's some additional information that I can provide for you all as property managers. So the first question, how does the fire department respond to a reported structure fire? And some further questions, some further information. How do firefighters find out what's happening? What resources are deployed to the scene? How long does it take to put a fire out? This information is always questions that come to me as a professional firefighter. How we respond to a reported structure fire is based off of our SOPs. I understand, depending on where you are in the country, your local fire department may be career or may be volunteer. It may be a mixture of career and volunteer firefighters. But the response to a reported structure fire typically will be SOP based. It will be predetermined. If it is a reported structure fire, a specific number of units will be dispatched. So whether it's 4 engines and 2 ladder trucks, along with a shift commander, there will be other resources deployed because it is a reported structure fire. The alarm card will dictate that. How do we find out what's happening? That's information that is given to us from dispatch. So if it's a predetermined address that we have in our computer-aided dispatch, then we have information available to us in the rigs. How do we find out what's happening? It's basically the information that the people on scene are giving dispatch. If it's an automatic alarm, being a smoke detector is activated, which trips a fire alarm system, as a fire department, we only know that it's an automatic alarm at 22 Main Street for a smoke detector on the 2nd floor. And obviously when we get there, if we see smoke or we talk to residents on scene, that's when we collect more information and know that it's a structure fire. How long does it take to put a fire out? That depends on what's burning, how long it's been burning, our water supply considerations. Every fire is different. Fires nowadays are burning hotter, are burning faster. It all depends the contents and what is burning itself. Our on-scene priorities for our fire department are always life safety. After that, we always discuss stabilizing the incident, so putting out the fire, and one of our considerations is always going to be property conservation. We try to do as little damage as possible, but life safety and incident stabilization does come first and always will come first. When does the fire investigation process begin? That begins at the conclusion of the fire. That begins when the salvage and overhaul process is complete. Once the fire is deemed to be out, that's when that investigation piece begins. So whether that's handled through your local fire marshal's office or state emergency management official, state fire marshal resources, every authority having jurisdiction approaches it a little different as far as whose jurisdiction it is when it comes to investigating the fire. But that fire investigation process begins when the fire is out, hazards have been mitigated, and in tandem with a discussion with the building department, is it safe to enter the structure? Is it safe to begin that fire investigation process? I hope the past 2 minutes gives a little segue into other topics that we're going to learn, or if there's more follow-up that you need. But I always like to give a perspective on how does a fire department respond? What are we thinking? What are we doing? And when we arrive on scene, what are our priorities as first responders? So actions during a fire, and this is, again, this is geared towards if you are a property manager, if you are someone as a staff representative on scene. So while the fire is burning, the emergency scene can and will be a hectic place. There's going to be fire trucks everywhere. There's going to be residents evacuating. There'll be local news crews. It will be a hectic place. Always stay clear of the scene. Do not interfere with fire department response. And ensuring residents and the public stay clear as well. If there are no parking or fire lanes present that are dedicated parking for emergency vehicles, always make sure to stay clear of those areas. One important topic of discussion, and this gets into your emergency planning, this gets into the directions that you would give your residents, is for residents to evacuate or shelter in place if there is a fire. I will say this is a discussion that you should have with your authority having jurisdiction, being your fire department. Get their recommendations. They're the ones that are responding to your scene. They're the ones that are going to give their recommendation on what they would like the residents to do. In tandem with this, the conversation pairs up with what type of construction is the building. Where I'm getting at is if it's a 2-story townhouse style wood frame residence and there's a fire, you're going to want your residents to evacuate, get out of the building. Whereas if it's a 12-story high-rise, fire-resistant construction, fully sprinklered with a fully addressable alarm system, residents may be instructed to shelter in place. If it's not their unit that's being affected, they may be instructed to shelter in place versus evacuate, especially in a high-rise structure where the residents could be elderly or disabled. Keeping them in their units where there is fire protection systems, where there is safety for them, unless their unit is being affected by the fire. Typically, in a high-rise structure, residents can and will shelter in place versus evacuate in a stairwell that we as fire department officials are trying to use to get up to where the fire is. Every property that you have should have a plan for evacuation or shelter in place. Every property will be unique. Like I said, it's always good to touch base with the authority having jurisdiction, saying, here's our properties, here's the layout. If you respond, where are you going to park? How are you going to approach this fire? And what's the best recommendations for us as an organization? And even from there, you can create some type of collection point for tenants. If tenants are required to evacuate, where should they go? Where should they stand? How do they get more information? When the fire is actually happening, the emergency scene, like I said, can and will be a hectic place. So having a plan beforehand is an extremely important discussion to have, not only with staff, but also residents. After a fire, so immediately after a fire, most importantly, as an organization, as a housing organization, we need to account for all staff and residents. We need to work with the fire department and resources on scene. Accountability and communication are going to be the foundation of making sure that everybody is safe. Securing the site, whether it's with barricades, signage, how do we limit access to this property that now is a dangerous scene? It is extremely important. So if this is something that your organization is going to handle themselves, having supplies beforehand and having those logistics squared away and in storage, that's going to point you in the right direction. If you do have some type of fire response plan immediately after the fire, that is when you're going to activate it and get started. And part of that plan is going to be notifying your insurance carrier, getting the claim process started. But in tandem with that, immediately after the fire, once you start your accountability piece, your communication piece, securing the site, activating your fire response plan, talking to your insurance carrier, filling out the appropriate forms, the documentation begins now. Every minute counts. Everything that you're doing counts. If you're spending money relocating people, using resources, that documentation needs to be collected. Be sure that you're keeping adequate records of everything that you're doing, because it is important to, once you start the claim process with your carrier, you're going to want to submit the documentation as you're going along. So some site safety considerations: that post-fire scene is extremely dangerous, whether it's the potential for structural collapse, hazardous materials, electrical risks, and even potential for reignition. That fire scene is going to be a dangerous place. Only trained professionals should assess these hazards. So do not allow residents or other staff or vendors to enter the scene until it's cleared by the fire department and structural professionals. So that's maybe your local building department and your health department. So some considerations that you need to be aware of: exposed wires, smoke damage, structural instability, collapse zones for damaged structures. In the fire service, we try to park our trucks 1.5 times the height of the building away from the structure. If it's a 2-story structure that's 20 feet tall, we're trying to park at a minimum 30 feet away from the structure, and we just call that the collapse zone. Not allowing re-entry until it's cleared by the authorities, that is extremely important. And along with that, with that re-entry piece, if it's part of the investigation, if it's part of the cleanup, if you're trying to get maintenance crews in there to start cleanup, please make sure that they have the appropriate personal protective equipment on and that they've been trained on how to properly use that PPE. So we always want to engage certified, licensed, and insured restoration or safety contractors. There are multiple restoration contractors in the country, so please do your homework. Please talk to as many vendors as you can. Talk to people who have used the contractors to see if they've had positive or negative experiences, but creating that relationship beforehand. If it's XYZ, a disaster restoration company who you trust, who you've had predetermined response plans with, activating that fire response plan. It's as simple as picking up the phone and calling XYZ Restoration saying, we had a fire, this is the address, and they'll respond to the scene. They're professionals. Again, make sure that they're licensed and insured, but they'll start working with the emergency management officials on scene. They'll start working with the building department and start that either board up, securing, or cleanup process on site. Communication is everything in the hours, minutes, and days following a fire. So notifying residents with accurate, consistent updates. Residents just want to know the next steps. Are they going to be relocated? If they are going to be relocated, where are they going? How are they going to get there? And for how long? So having a communication plan, whether it's via text, phone calls, automatic messages, an application that your organization may use, or even communicating through social media, making sure residents know how the organization is going to communicate with them, and then it doesn't leave them in the dark. Maintaining contact with fire officials and restoration teams. The fire officials may be on site the next day or two, potentially even the next week, depending on what the cause of the fire was or if anything else happened on scene during that fire. So maintaining contact with fire officials and restoration teams, they're going to be the ones on site, and you should be receiving updates from them on a daily basis. When you are communicating, always provide calm, clear, and factual updates. Address the immediate needs for you as an organization, along with potentially for the residents. What do they need? Is there any information that needs to get out to them? And when you do send out all the communications, make sure you're documenting on your end the date, the time, the message, what information is being shared with residents or staff, just so you're keeping an accurate log of what information you're putting out there for your residents and also for your staff. When it comes to the insurance and documentation side of the post-fire response, we always want to initiate the claim with your insurance carrier as soon as possible. The insurance process starts immediately after a fire. You'll need photos, receipts for emergency lodging, meals, documentation, inventories of lost or damaged items, make sure you are keeping a clear log of this documentation. Always keep a full inventory, photos, serial numbers, track all costs related to this fire. Coordinating with insurance adjusters for inspections. It's always important. The insurance adjuster is going to be the one who arrives on site to assess the damage. So when you communicate with them, maintain a copy of that record. Delayed and or incomplete documentation can delay the insurance process. Once the insurance piece begins and you've initiated the claim with your insurance company, it is extremely important. Maintain all records, maintain an inventory, maintain photo evidence of what you're doing, any receipts that you have to just clearly track this claim process for not only you, but for your carrier as well. So as a housing organization, this is the second question that I would like to pose. How do you balance the speed of repair with quality and code compliance? One thing that I have to recommend is this is where having pre-vetted vendors is extremely important. So if it's XYZ disaster restoration company that you've worked with, that's how you can balance the speed of repair. You're getting them on site, you've worked with them before, they've worked with potentially with your insurance carrier before, so then basically they can just get to work. Having familiarity with your emergency management officials along with building codes and a strong oversight of the repair process, that's only going to help. This is obviously a time that we do not want to cut corners. We do not want to have unlicensed and uninsured people working in the buildings. Everything must meet code and insurer standards. Although we want to get the buildings back online as soon as possible, cutting corners definitely is not going to help us in the long run. So we want to make sure that there is a balance where we want quality work being performed. We want the unit to be rebuilt satisfactory to meet code and industry standards, and we want to make sure that the unit is safe, if not safer than it was before. So we do need to balance that speed of repair with quality and code compliance. We do not want to rush and cut corners. So when it comes to the restoration and repair piece for a unit after a fire, as I said, we always want to hire licensed restoration contractors. We always want to assess the damage, whether it's structural, electrical, and mechanical. The building department is usually the first on scene. They're going to be the ones to assess damage. They may have a structural engineer to look at the building, but they'll do that in tandem with any adjusters that need to come out on site, and they will look at the total damage. If it's a kitchen fire with some damage to the cabinetry along with the drywalls, that's a simple repair or a simple fix. Even looking at the photo here, if the fire got up into the ceiling, then we're talking about our floor joists, our roof rafters, mechanical wiring, electrical. Obviously, that's going to take a little bit longer for repair. When it comes to the abatement side of this, whether it's smoke, soot, mold, asbestos, this is definitely going to be uncovered in that overhaul process by the fire department, but all these things need to be abated before we start that repair and restoration process. So as a property manager, our oversight is verifying all repairs meet code and insurance requirements. Talk with your contractors, talk with your building and health officials, talk with your fire marshal on scene during that repair process to say, is what we're doing meeting code or exceeding it? And then also have a timeline for restoration and recovery, have goals, have weekly progress and update meetings. I understand in this post-COVID world, even the supply chain issues are continuing, whether it's drywall or electrical or even on the lumber side. But having a timeline and sticking to it is extremely important because, again, we do have a displaced or relocated resident. So we want to get them back in their unit as soon as possible. Some legal and compliance follow-up information. So this is where, if during this discussion, this is potentially a topic that can come up where more information or further training may be needed. So coordinating with code enforcement and building officials, it is extremely important. If we have to consult with our legal counsel on liability and compliance, it definitely is a conversation to have beforehand to set clear expectations. We want to retain all reports and communication and document everything that we do. Addressing citations or code upgrades when it comes to that restoration process is definitely a part of the conversation, and retaining all records and receipts for liability protection. We want to be prepared for the claims process. We want to be prepared to comply with code enforcement orders. So again, consulting with your internal or external legal counsel early if there's a serious loss or injury, it is extremely important. This is definitely a part of the claims process and in the post-fire world to make sure that we're checking all our boxes when it comes to legal and compliance follow-up post-fire. So a third question, what partnerships or community resources have helped in the past to assist displaced tenants? Again, depending on where you are in the country, whether it's a state resource, whether it's a local resource, having partnerships predetermined that where contact information, where their logistics and garage storage supply is, whether it's Salvation Army, American Red Cross, your local emergency management officials, these resources come into play in that post-fire world. Having a partnership, knowing every community resource that's available to you, they're going to come and assist when it comes to assisting displaced tenants. Again, if a tenant is displaced, this is potentially one of the worst days of their lives because they're suffering a fire loss. They may have left their unit in a hurry. They may not even have reading glasses. They may not even have a phone charger for their phone. Organizations like the Red Cross, Salvation Army, local emergency management officials, your building department, your health department, they've assisted in relocating residents in the past. This is their bread and butter. This is what they do on a daily basis. Establish that partnership in your community now if you haven't already done so. Make that part of your emergency response plan. Make that part of your post-incident action plan for after fires, and keep them involved throughout the claims process. So when it comes to supporting residents, we always want to help residents find temporary housing if displaced. We always want to communicate. Again, we discussed this in the earlier part of this presentation. Communicate and provide updates on restoration timelines. Give them, if it is an estimate, make sure you're letting them know that it is an estimate. If it's a definite where, hey, construction is complete, we're just going through the final checklist and we hope to have you moved in by Friday afternoon, then that's more of a definite. Connect the residents with community resources, ask the residents, talk to them, ask what they need, and point them in the right direction. If you do need to communicate with their family and relay messages, whether it's through text, email, social media, or emergency responder apps through your organization, always make sure that you are their first point of contact. You are the housing provider, and that you can provide them with information throughout this process after a fire. So after the emergency has passed and residents are stabilized, one thing that you can do is conduct some sort of debrief with your staff and your vendors, okay? So consulting with your fire department, identifying areas for fire prevention improvement, updating fire safety plans, inspections, and training. If we're not looking at this fire as a learning experience, then we're not giving it the attention that it deserves. So even when it comes to identifying what the source of the fire was, if it's an accidental fire, then it's in one category. If it's an intentional fire, it's in another category. Are there areas of training for staff and or residents? Can we make this process go smoother? God forbid we experience another fire. Did the residents relocate as instructed? Did they know what to do? When it came to the fire department response, is there anything that we as a housing organizations can do to assist them? When it came to working with our pre-vetted vendors, did everybody deliver on what was promised? Having some type of post-incident review and critique, it is extremely important. We do this in the fire service after every fire. what went well, what didn't go well. If we were to respond to that location again, would we do anything differently? Having that discussion is an important piece of risk management, because at the conclusion of the discussion, what you're doing is you're updating your plans, you're updating your emergency operations plans, or you're identifying areas that need further inspection, or you're identifying gaps in your training, whereas we need to bring in additional resources to educate the residents or the staff. Having this post-incident review is an extremely important piece of risk management, and that discussion definitely needs to be had, because again, this is a high severity, low frequency incident. It's something that doesn't happen very often, so we definitely have to learn from it to prepare ourselves for the next time. So when we discuss fire prevention moving forward, fire prevention is an important piece of property management. So having regular fire drills and safety inspections, inviting the fire department to pre-plan the building or property. As a shift commander in the fire service, this is something that, as firefighters, we love to do. We love to come on site. We love to walk through a building, because if we can walk through a building during the day when the lights are on, then we potentially know where we're going if we have to walk through a building at night with the power out and potentially in smoky conditions. If you can invite your fire department to pre-plan the building, do that. Have them walk through, because then they're going to identify, this is where we park. This is the fire department connection where we're going to hook up for the standpipe. This is the type of sprinkler system that's in the building. This is the type of building construction. This is where utility shutoffs are. Pre-planning that property is extremely important for the fire department, as well as it's important for you as an organization. Ensuring fire alarms, extinguishers, and sprinklers are up to code. Again, as I said it in the beginning of the presentation, any fire protection equipment that we have on site, we need to follow the manufacturer's specifications for maintenance and inspection, and in tandem with NFPA and local code requirements. Training staff and residents on fire emergency procedures. So when it comes to training your staff, this is something that should be done on an annual basis. And when it comes to training residents, anytime we have an interaction with the resident, whether it's through a rent recertification or an interaction they may have with the property manager, use that as a training opportunity. Use that as an opportunity to ask them, if you had a fire today, what would you do? Where would you go? Do you know what to do, whether it's sheltering in place or evacuation? Do you know where the fire alarm pull stations are? How would you call 911 if you didn't have your cell phone? That training aspect is an extremely important piece of fire prevention when it comes to managing a property. So a summary and some final takeaways before I pose the last question on the next slide. But have a checklist of do's and don'ts for when it comes to a pre-fire, during a fire, and after a fire. As a property manager, emphasize communication, documentation, and prevention. Have a plan for post-fire response. And again, depending on the property, depending on the type of construction, one plan for one property versus another plan for a property 2 streets over, it may be different. Always have an after-action review to see what areas need improvement. We need to learn from these experiences. We need to learn how to prevent fires from happening if they were preventable, but also we need to learn where gaps are within our risk management plan for a post-fire response. These are resources that are available through HII online with our risk management center. So please reach out to either myself or your risk consultant when it comes to further needs for either the checklist for do's and don'ts or creating any type of post-fire response plan. So I put this question at the end of the presentation because I wanted to pose the idea of what part of your current response plan needs the most improvement and or review. So if you look at the past 40 minutes of our discussion, was there a slide? Was there an area? Was there a bullet point that a light bulb went off in your head saying, this is something I need to look into. This is something that we could improve on. Or, hey, when Nick brought up having pre-vetted vendors, did a vendor come to mind? So I put this at the end of the presentation because I want everybody to take away The idea that your current emergency response plan, it potentially could need improvement and or review. So please look at your current response plan, look at your emergency operations plan and or your business continuity plans, and identify gaps in coverage, identify gaps and areas that need improvement. Please reach out if you do have any questions. But in conclusion, today, some of the things that we covered are key steps to take after a fire incident, how to communicate with tenants and authorities. Again, that accountability and communication piece is so important. How to manage damage assessment and restoration. So how do we work with pre-vetted vendors? How do we work with our local emergency management officials? These are people that are coming on site. We need to keep them safe, but also we need to get the units back online. How to ensure safety and regulatory compliance. How do we work with our internal legal teams when it comes to the claims process, working with adjusters, working with building officials. These are all things that we can have a plan beforehand to make sure that we're managing the different aspects of getting the property and or unit back online after a fire. I hope everybody took something away from the presentation today. If you do have further questions, by all means, please bring them up. You can shoot me an email. My contact information is on our website, but I thank everybody for being here today and being a part of this webinar for post-fire response for property managers. Again, my name is Nick Mayo. I'm a senior risk consultant with HII Group, and thank you very much for attending today.